The one thing I dread most in life, besides virtual speech competitions, is telling people my real name, Karina, a multicultural name that translates to beloved, pure, and even cute, only for people to always confuse it with Katrina. Not my name, but also the enemy to any culture. First created in 1910 by Mexican illustrator Jose Guadalupe Posada, the Catrina's skeletal appearance in European clothes mocked Mexicans who tried to appear more European to Spanish people, a practice we now recognize as partial cultural assimilation. Throughout history, many minority groups adopted the beliefs or practices of a dominant social majority, like a race or nationality, without abandoning their own identity. Ideally, this allowed them to integrate into society while introducing their own cultural values. But, as Claudine Kazar of Anthropology Review explains, assimilation is a two-way street that involves both minority groups and society working together to build bridges between different communities. But, as seen with the Katrina, assimilation was usually just a one-way street. The only way for minorities to truly be accepted in society is for the dominant majority to meaningfully understand, help with, and sympathize with their issues. This may seem daunting, but as Kazar put it, assimilation is simply a two-way street. So let's learn how to safely cross it. First, let's look to our left to explore past examples of assimilation. Then, let's look to our right to see how these communities are faring today. And once we know it's safe, walk forward into a more connected world. While partial cultural assimilation mainly involves the adoption of cultural practices, it can also involve the adoption of economic strategies and even political beliefs. And no country's history better exemplifies assimilation than that of the United States. It's estimated that during the Industrial Revolution alone, over 20 million immigrants came to the U.S. from across the world. According to Dr. Randa Bermitsky from the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy and Research, of those immigrants, those from more Western countries such as Germany or England worked and lived similarly to Americans, while immigrants from countries like China, Italy, and Mexico fell behind because of one key reason: their names. Names that seemed too foreign to Americans often meant immigrants were less likely to attend school, find jobs, and make connections outside their race. Eventually, many immigrants either changed their first or spelling of their last name to better fit American naming conventions. And this is where we get such icons as Bruce Lee, formerly Lee Jun-fa, and Richie Valens, formerly Richard Steven Valenzuela. But assimilation wasn't just about individuals. In some cases, it was adopted by entire countries, such as Mexico, during the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz from 1884 to 1911, better known as the Porfiriato. During the Porfiriato, Diaz focused on modernizing Mexico in any way he could find. And boy, did he find ways. According to the Library of Congress, he placated U.S. investors and reestablished connections with European countries by allowing both American and European business owners to profit from Mexico's single most valuable natural resource: indigenous slave labor. And although that's already quite dire, sometimes assimilation was even a matter of survival. In post-World War I Germany, many Germans blamed Jewish people for the economic collapse of the Weimar Republic, and many Jewish people, fearing for the safety of themselves and their families, decided that the best way to interfere with this would be to become more involved in far-right German politics. In her book, Hitler, Germans, and the Jewish Question, Sarah Ann Gordon explains the reason behind this kind of behavior. According to her, many Jewish people thought that if they became more aligned with far-right anti-Semitic parties, they themselves would be less likely to be oppressed by these parties. But when the Nazis took complete control of Germany, all members of these parties were either arrested or forced to flee the country, but none being spared by the party they once supported. When we look at something like this. It seems like assimilation simply doesn't work. But all of these examples actually led to some meaningful assimilation. According to Dr. Abramitsky, immigrants who Americanized their names completed more years of schooling, earned more, and were less likely to be unemployed than their counterparts with more foreign-sounding names. Changing their names didn't change their origins or their appearance, but it made them a lot more palatable to American people and businesses. Assimilation also had its intended effect in Mexico, when the GDP almost tripled from just $9 billion in 1870 to over $23 billion by 1900. Foreign businesses backed by cheap domestic labor was what made Mexico into the economic powerhouse of its time. And the experiences that Jewish people endured have led to anti-Semitic statements, imagery, and rhetoric being completely outlawed across Europe to this day. What ultimately renders assimilation ineffective are its long-term negative consequences. Even today, many artists of color often abandon meaningful, historical real names in favor of stage names that better suit their brand. This is probably why we recognize Calvin Cortazar Broadus Jr. as Snoop Dogg, Curtis James Jackson III as 50 Cent, Usher Raymond IV as simply Usher, and probably why I couldn't find a fifth. But not all assimilators are so successful, as the Gorgon Project, an indigenous rights organization, estimates that the average indigenous Mexican makes 30 times less in their lifetime than the inheritor of a European or American business residing in Mexico. And while Jewish people are legally protected in Europe, around the world, their struggles are still belittled, to the point where one of the most powerful people in our country can openly side with their oppressor with almost no social repercussions. When we take time to look at both sides, it becomes clear that partial culture assimilation has many negative drawbacks for minority communities. It leads to communities disconnected from their culture, inequality between assimilators and non-assimilators, and negative reinforcement and understanding of communities. So, without a way to get through, should minorities just wait for the right time to go? No, because this completely ignores the power that the dominant majority wields in society. Whether cultural, economic, or political, majorities play a critical role in the acceptance of minorities. But what exactly is that role? Simple. As Claudine Kaiser put it, assimilation is simply a two-way street. And in order for minorities to earn the right of way, majorities have the responsibility to go now by navigating differences, offering support, and welcoming all. When you encounter certain minority groups in your area, take time to learn about their beliefs, practices, and traditions, making sure you understand not just how this shapes their culture, but them as people. Once you identify these, offer support by helping people find organizations, stores, or other community spaces, even if that space is just you. But even then, it can be difficult to understand all minority communities equally. But what shouldn't be difficult is showing compassion to people regardless of how well you understand them. Because this kind of support is the only true way to guarantee acceptance of all. For minorities, assimilation is often rooted in the needs for success, growth, survival, and acceptance. But the short-term benefits of this are heavily outweighed by its long-term negative consequences. But in a world where cultural, economic, and political differences make minorities and majorities and the need for assimilation inevitable, we should all strive to learn how to navigate our differences with others, offer support in any way we can, and welcome everyone with open minds. Because that way, no one will ever dread sharing their beloved, pure, and cute real name, even at those pesky virtual tournaments.